Hey, what's going on, everybody? Commander Crane here, and we are back with another Pioneer deck tech. And this episode is going to be very, very special because I'm here with Landon Goldsboro. He is a recent regional championship qualifier winner here in Michigan. He piloted Rakdos Goblins to the finals, and it was a two-slotter, so he ended up going and qualifying for the regional championship qualifier. So I'm here with Landon. How's it going, Landon?
Hey, howdy, going really, really well. Excited to talk about my deck. I love it a lot, so I'm looking forward to talking about the cards.
Me too, honestly. And for those who are either longtime viewers or recent viewers, this is the first time that we've ever had a guest actually for a Pioneer deck tech or a Modern deck tech. It's the very first time, so I'm very excited for this. I think we're both ready. So we're going to hop right into it. We're going to talk about some, Landon specifically is going to talk about more details of the deck and kind of how the event went more toward the end of the video. So the first thing we're going to start with is just the deck. We're going to go right pretty much in converted mana cost order. So let's go ahead and just start with the one drops here. So, all right. So, in the Goblins deck, we are playing 4 Cacophony Scamp, 2 Fireblade Charger, and 2 Fanatical Firebrand is our main one drops. There is another one drop we're going to talk about, but I wanted to save that for the next slide. So, Landon, go ahead and take it away. Go ahead and talk about the one drops that we have featured here.
Yep, so we've got 4 Cacophony Scamp and 2 Fireblade Charger. These cards are essentially the same thing. It's a 1/1 for 1, and when the Cacophony Scamp deals damage to a player, you can sacrifice it. So you get that trigger right away. But essentially, you just want the effect of pinging your opponent's creatures. So the 2 Fanatical Firebrands do that as well, except in the case of the Firebrand, it's an activated ability. So for the aggressive one drops, these are the slots that we use. There's also, we'll see later, some cool combos you can do with our Black Splash. With some death touch damage from these creatures, you can end up taking down some bigger creatures. So we really fill up the one drop slot in this version of Goblins, just so we stay low to the ground and aggressive. They combo really well with the other creatures we run as well.
I really like the one drop suite here, honestly. I know I've played a little bit of Goblins in the past, but I never actually used Cacophony Scamp and Fireblade Charger. And I must say, like the games that we've played and the games I've seen, these cards are really, really strong. Was there ever any consideration for maybe a card like Legion Loyalist, for instance?
I love Legion Loyalist a lot. I played it in Modern 8 whack a lot. The card's really good, really powerful. But essentially, the synergy, the lack of synergy, as opposed to the Scamp and the Charger and the Firebrand, specifically with Call of the Death Dweller, which there's a little sneak peek for you, um, is really why I play them. And honestly, I could see playing, if you just really love Legion Loyalist, you could do it. To be honest, it's a one drop 1/1 haste goblin. It's going to be good sometimes, but really we're just looking for maximum synergy. So you'll see with the rest of the goblins, I think it'll make more sense as to why we're playing these over loyalists.
Okay, all right, I dig it. All right, so let's go and hop to the next slide here. So I know we talked about that there was still one more one drop we're going to play, and that's Skirk Prospector. I really, really like Skirk Prospector. I guess I'll go ahead real quick. Go ahead and talk about Skirk Prospector and its role in the deck.
Yep, Skirk Prospector is an insanely important goblin. You can never go below 4 of them. Skirk Prospector can often be played on just turn 1 as just a setup play. You're very rarely going to sacrifice it to itself to ramp into things early. You really just want to keep it around on the board because it goes so well with cards like you'll see we're playing 4 Runvelt Hordemaster, which we'll get into in a second a little more, but sacrificing your goblins is really good for value in this deck. You can sacrifice your Scamp and Charger to get their damage trigger right away. You can pump up those little guys and get their damage triggers to grow even bigger to 2 and 3, so you can be hitting your opponent's bigger creatures, taking them down. So Skirk Prospector really is like an engine card. So if you can hold on to one at least, it'll be really good, especially when you get into the later game. So I just love Skirk Prospector in this deck. You can't go below 4 in the main board.
I've always really liked it. When I played a little bit of Goblins in Standard with Dominaria, and then I threw together like a mono red Goblins deck a couple years ago, and I feel the same way. Skirk Prospector, like it's a 4 of, and it'll never go below 4. I think the card is just fantastic.
hmm
All right, so the two drops here. So I guess one is a lord and one is pseudo a lord. So we're playing 4 Battlecry Goblin in the deck and 4 Runvelt Horde Masters. So I guess go ahead and talk about the differences between this, because obviously like they're similar cards, but they're also not similar cards just because their play patterns are a lot different. Because you got the Battle Cry that obviously, it pumps your other goblins but makes goblins. So it's like a half lord, half like a what's the card? Goblin Rabble Master kind of way. I guess floor is yours. Go ahead
Yeah.
and talk about these powerful 2-drops.
Yeah, so Battlecry Goblin I'll talk about first. Battlecry Goblin is probably the best card in the deck, I would say, as far as just pure aggression goes. So this deck, the reason this deck is so good is because you can really just apply a ton of pressure. And Battlecry Goblin lets you go tall and wide at the same time because of the Pack Tactics trigger. You can go extra wide just by attacking with a couple creatures, usually after activating first with Battlecry Goblin. So you really, I mean, it's a 2-drop, so we have it with the other 2-drops, but you really want to be playing Battlecry Goblin on a turn when you can immediately activate it to get that value, get that haste and that pump effect right away. So typically, this deck is all about curving. It's a creature deck, so you want to curve out 1, 2, 3, 4, and usually Battlecry Goblin will kind of be like the nail in the coffin for your opponent. Play it, activate it, swing with your wide board of pumped up goblins. It's just really, really solid. So we also have the Runvelt Horde Masters, which is one of the more recent additions to the deck from Dominaria United, which was so long ago, believe it or not. But the first real 2-mana lord for goblins, plus the triggered ability that it has is just insane value. So you can especially with Skirk Prospector, you can start pretty much digging through your deck once it gets later in the game, and that's part of what makes the deck so resilient to sweepers, is because you can have a board of 3 or 4 goblins and a Runbelt Horde Master, and then you get hit with a sweeper and all of a sudden your hand is refilled with all these triggers and you can just kind of play out a bunch more goblins on the next turn. So it makes it really hard for control players to do anything about grinding us out, because we always have more card advantage and we can always be swinging in with Battlecry Goblin and just really putting on that pressure. So Runvelt Horde Master is awesome. You'll always want to make sure when faced with any kind of exile-based removal, if you have a Skirk Prospector out, you always want to sacrifice your goblins in response, because you'll miss out on those Runvelt Horde Master triggers if you don't do that. So that's something that first-time players can often miss. You want to make sure you always take full advantage of those Horde Master triggers, because that's one of the easiest things to forget as a newer player.
Yeah, no, that's definitely fair. And I must say, too, with Runvelt Horde Master, playing with it and against it, the card is really, really strong. I mean, just it almost feels bad for your opponent, because, like, for instance, like, decks like, Rakdos that are trying to trade 1 for 1, it's really awkward for them, because it's like 1 mana, an opponent sacrifices target creature, and they kind of draw a card. I mean, being able to exile a card, it isn't, it just depends on if you hit a goblin, but it's just really, really good. It's just so much value from Runvelt Horde Master.
Yeah, it's really solid. And one last thing that I want to point out while we're still on this slide is the synergy between Skirk Prospector and Battlecry Goblin. This is another huge synergy point. Another reason I just love these cards. So you can swing out with your entire board, and then once your opponent declares blocks after you've pumped with Battlecry Goblin, you can then sacrifice the creatures that they blocked with Skirk Prospector to activate Battlecry Goblin additional times. So you can sacrifice, if they block your Battlecry Goblin, for example, you can activate the ability and then start paying costs, and you can even sacrifice the Battlecry Goblin itself to activate its own ability. So you can really just get around their creatures, go super wide, just smack in for a ton of damage out of nowhere with Skirk Prospector and Battlecry Goblin.
Which, it's funny you mentioning that, because we were playing at our Friday Night Magic about a week ago from this recording, and I saw you do that. because you were playing against Is It Phoenix, and you like full swung, and they like blocked block, and you sacrificed those goblins, and then pumped the other ones, and it was like massive lethal. I'm like, wow, I never even thought about
Mhm.
that. So yeah, it's definitely
Yep,
pretty
it's a
sweet.
really sick line. Yep.
So no, I definitely really like that line. It's pretty cool. So all right, so there is technically still another 2-drop we got to talk about that I know you really like this card, as well as another value card that we play in the deck. So we're gonna head to the next slide here. So the other 2-drop I want to talk about. So obviously, Conspicuous Snoop is fantastic. We're playing 4 copies of that. We're going to talk about that one in a second. But the card I really want you to talk about is Fisher Wizard, which you're playing 2 copies of it in your current list. Go ahead and talk about this really obscure, kind of like draft common that most people have played with, or not really played with in 60 card formats.
Yeah, Fisher Wizard is a really bad card. I'll start off by saying that right now. The only reason we're playing it is because it says Goblin there on the middle of the card. It's historically just kind of like a thing that goblins always, they have just really bad stat lines, and they're all about the synergy. Like always, you'll see most of these cards say Goblin on them because they're all about the synergy. So specifically in this deck, it'll make more sense when we get further onto the more combo aspects of this deck. But Fisher Wizard is around for specifically discarding Goblin Chain Whirlers or other cards that you can later bring back with Call of the Death Dweller. So Fisher Wizard, the reason it's good is because you can play it on turn 2 and discard a Goblin Chain Whirler, and it allows you to use your turn 3 to play Call the Death Dweller and start killing your opponent's creatures a lot sooner than you normally would. It's a card that I like. I like it because it's kind of silly, and people always read it and they're like, "What on earth are you doing? Why are you playing this card?" But I also just think it can be pretty decent. But this is definitely one of the flex slots. I think the deck probably has about 2 flex slots, I would say. Maybe 3 if you're feeling frisky. But if you really don't like Fisher Wizard, I could see cutting it for more of the 1-drop pingers. Or some people get a little frisky with Touch of the Moonglove or whatever. But I like Fisher Wizard, but really the reason is just for getting your cards into the graveyard.
Okay, yeah, no, I definitely like it. I mean, hey, it's a goblin. I mean, so it fits right in the goblin deck. And speaking of 2-drop goblins, I really like this one too. Conspicuous Snoop. Obviously, it's part of the main combo in Modern. So normally when you see Conspicuous Snoop, you're like, oh man, that's combo potential. In this deck, there's there's no infinite combo, but the card is just really good. So just go ahead and talk about Conspicuous Snoop.
Yep, Conspicuous Snoop is a very good goblin. Probably, I believe it's the most expensive goblin in the deck, and it's only $4.50 a copy. So, but Conspicuous Snoop it just does so much. It's so crazy, especially in a deck where you're running a ton of goblin cards. It's really just there for getting that value. There's no combos really. I mean, ever so often you can, activate a Battlecry Goblin ability off the top of your library or something, if that makes sense. But usually you just want to cast it off the top. So Conspicuous Snoop can be a little hit or miss because you are playing a few non-Goblin cards in the deck. So, but ever so often you'll just hit, 3 Goblins off the top, 3 1-drops in a row, clear off, those cards, move through your draws, and it can be really good just as a value card in this deck. So sometimes you could see cutting them in sideboard games where you just need to be fast. But I still love Conspicuous Snoop and Pioneer. It's just such a good value card. And if your opponent, decides that they're not going to respect it, like happened a number of times during my RCQ run, they just did not respect Snoop, and I just got so much value off the top of my deck and ended up winning because of the board that it created for me. So I really like 4 Conspicuous Snoop.
I think the card is pretty sweet. I'm not gonna lie. When I first started playing a Goblin deck in Pioneer, I had 4 copies of it, but it was the card that I was like, man, I don't know if this card's really that good. But then every so often you get those games where, like you said, you just play like 3 Goblins in a row, and you go from like being a little behind to being really far ahead. So no, I really do like Conspicuous Snoop. I think the card's sweet.
Yep, it's awesome.
So okay, so this next card, it's not technically a goblin, but it's a goblin in spirit. Well, at least the front side of it's not a goblin. You're playing 4 copies of Fable of the Mirror Breaker. So obviously, most people that play Pioneer or know about Pioneer know how strong this card is. Heck, it's banned in Standard. It's also really good in Modern. The card is just fantastic, but what's really cool is you actually get synergy with Fable of the Mirror Breaker. So I guess what's the motivation to, besides it making a goblin and transforming into a goblin, what role does it actually fit in this deck?
Yeah, Fable of the Mirror Breaker, probably one of the best cards in Pioneer. I mean, I feel like the best cards in Pioneer are Rakdos colors, so another reason why I'm just a Rakdos gamer forever. But Fable of the Mirror Breaker is just even more insane in this deck. I mean, most decks just play it because it's got such great value. Um, but both, Chapter 1 and Chapter 3 and Chapter 2 all synergize very heavily with this deck. So you create your 2/2 right off the bat, so it comes with a body, so you get that immediate value even if they remove the Fable. And then on Chapter 2, you can start discarding cards that you can later bring back with Call the Death Dweller, specifically Goblin Chain Whirler, or just some other of your 2 drops and 1 drops, so you can get those into the graveyard. And then when it flips over, it just goes totally insane. If you ever have a Kiki Jiki flipped in play and a bunch, and even just a small number of goblins, it's just really hard for your opponent to come back from it because you have so many good ETB effects and dies effects, and you get both of those when you create copies. So you can even start copying Battlecry goblins to get additional pack tactics triggers. It pretty much does it all. So the only reason I could ever see cutting one of these from the main board is because the card is slow when you compare it to the rest of the deck. It also lacks synergy with cards like Conspicuous Snoop and Runvelt Hordemaster, where you can't actually cast it if you exile it off the top or if you see it on the top. So it is a card that I could see cutting for that reason, but at the same time, the card is just so broken. I'd play 4. If it was me, I would play 4. So
See, what we just need a version of it that just comes in transformed, so it's automatically a goblin, or the front side is a goblin. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Let's do that. Let's break Pioneer.
Put me in R&D. Come on, do it.
Yeah.
So all right, so let's go and hop into the last slide, at least where we're talking about non-land cards. So I know you've been alluding to it the entire time. From my understanding, from what you've told me and from what I've seen, it's like the best part of the deck for the most part. So the 4 Goblin Chain Whirlers and 4 Call of the Death Dweller. The floor is yours. Talk about the synergy with these 2 cards, and the role they have in this deck.
Yep, so this is the reason we're Rakdos, is just this one card in the main board at least. I'm going to talk about Call the Death Dweller. So Call the Death Dweller is a 3-mana sorcery. You can return up to 2, so either 1 or 2 creature cards with total converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. You can put a Death Touch counter on one and a Menace counter on the other, or put both counters on the same creature. And this combos very well, specifically with Goblin Chain Whirler, as you can imagine. So you can target your Chain Whirler in the graveyard, bring it back, and it'll get Death Touch and deal 1 damage to all your opponent's creatures. So it'll basically be a one-sided board wipe, which is just insanely good against any creature deck, and even some decks that, are just playing a Sheoldred and some other, little creature. Just wiping those all out can be, it can be just like a 5 for 1. Or a 6 for 1, or even just a 3 or 2 for 1, and it's just totally insane. So this is the reason I play Rakdos. It's a very grindy card. You can kind of just get out of a lot of sticky situations. So if you watched one of the most recent videos on the channel, you can see how I blew up probably like 6 Hydras or something like that, and just got out of a situation where I was supposed to lose that game, and call just comes out of nowhere, and but that's not the only reason that we play Call of the Death Dweller either. It also just happens to be really good with all the other cards in the deck, because you still just run a ton of really solid 2-drops that give you a ton of value or can be really aggressive. You run a bunch of little 1-drops that can also benefit from having Death Touch. So most of your 1-drops deal damage to things when they die, or you can sacrifice them to deal damage. So you can just kill a creature and also have another 2-drop sitting around just by playing that one card. So it's easily a 2 for 1, even if you don't have Goblin Chain Whirler in the graveyard. It also just catches people off guard all the time. One of my favorite things to do with Call of the Death Dweller when I don't have a Chain Whirler in the graveyard is to just, on turn 5, bring back a Battlecry Goblin and something else, and just activate Battlecry Goblin. You can just get lethal out of nowhere, give it Menace. So it just does a whole ton. And Goblin Chain Whirler also on its own is just a pretty big goblin for what it is. Like usually you'll see, I'm used to, my 3 mana goblins being 1/1s, like, a goblin matron or something like that. But Goblin Chain Whirler is a 3 mana 3/3, so it's on par with other creatures, and it has first strike. So it can just really be a huge tool against aggressive decks. You can kind of just block things, sweep away. Amalia combo has a bunch of X1s. You can just sweep those away. Elves from mono green. So Goblin Chain Whirler can also just be fine on its own. You can sometimes even take out Planeswalkers if they recently minused it. I've done that plenty of times as well. So I love 4 of each of these cards. This is why we play the deck. Maybe when we talk about sideboarding, I'll talk a little bit more about how the deck changes after sideboarding. But in game 1, this combo is usually just pretty good into a wide field.
No, I definitely like it. And I guess, so my last question is, before we hop into the lands here, is, so I know I've seen in the past, some people would elect to play like a Gruul Goblins deck and do like Collected Company shenanigans, as opposed to Call of the Death Dweller. I guess my question for you is, like, have you seen or tried any of those Coco decks? And like, if so, like, I guess, like, is Call of the Death Dweller just that good? You just get so much value from it that you would say it's better than playing Collected Company?
Tried building collected company decks with goblins. I've never actually taken them to events. I've played other collected company decks, but not with goblins. I think the problem is a lot of those decks I'll see they'll play like elves, so you can ramp into collected companies, or you play a bunch of 3-drop goblins like your Rabble Masters, your Squee, that kind of thing. And obviously those cards are good, but it can be tough to make the make the play be fast enough. So you can often just not really have enough value in the long game. If you don't get your collected companies, you're kind of just like getting to turn 3 and casting 3 drops, and you just don't have a lot of staying power. Where I really like Call the Death Dweller, you just have a ton of staying power. You can top deck that card. I mean, you can top deck a Coco, sure, but I think it's just a lot more. You have a lot more use cases with Call of Death Dweller, and you also have that combo finish with Chain Whirler. So I really just like the aggression and the staying power of the Rakdos version.
Okay, yeah, no, I can definitely understand that, and obviously you get to play Fable a little bit better, just because Collected Company does not put Fable the Mirror Breaker in play as well, so definitely,
Sure.
definitely
Yeah,
worth
and
noting.
one more thing I really like about this version is in the Coco versions you're a little bit less incentivized to play 2 drops, and Goblins just has so many good 2 drops that you really want to play. So I think that's another reason why I'm more on this deck, because I love Battlecry Goblin and Boardmaster and Snoop. I can't get away from those cards, so that's another reason.
Yeah, no, that's definitely fair. So, okay, so that's the entire main board. We'll go ahead and hop into the lands real quick, which it's a pretty standard mana base, I would say, for a Rakdos deck. So obviously you got like your staples. We have the Blackleaves Cliffs, we have the Blood Crypts, and the Sulphurous Springs. Also playing a few Blightstep Pathways and 3 Cavernous Souls, which obviously we're a Goblin deck, you're going to want to play Cavernous Souls. And then the last slide here, so I have 2 questions for you, at least for these lands. So obviously we have the 4 Den of the Bugbear and 2 Mountains. So my first question is Den of the Bugbear. So typically with man lands, you either see decks that don't play 4 of them just because they can come into play tapped. But what's really, really unique with this is obviously it's a goblin. So it's a synergistic man land, which most of the time decks that play man lands, it's just you're playing it because it's a man land, not just because it also has a lot of synergy. So I guess what role does Den of the Bugbear play in the mana base for this deck?
Den of the Bugbear, the reason we play 4 of them is because you basically want to see it every single game. In your games where you want to be aggressive and fast, you want to see it right away, have it on the field, and just have it as a closer. You can close out games really easy. They remove all your creatures, but it's a lot harder to remove Den because they have to do it at instant speed on your turn. So the reason we play 4 is just because you want to see it every single game. Even having a couple of them is fine because they kill one and the next one just keeps coming, keeps creating more of a board. And yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it's just so much synergy with the rest of the deck. If you have Battlecry Goblin out, you can, pump it up to a 4/2 or whatever, pump up the Goblin token, Runvelt Horde Master. It's just so much synergy. So we're really lucky with Den of the Bugbear. I love playing 4 of them. I love the card. I always wear a shirt of this exact art everywhere I take the card. I'm like, displaying it proud. I love Den of the Bugbear. So normally I wouldn't say run 4 lands that could often come in tapped, but because of the insane synergy with the deck, I run 4. So that's why I love it.
So, believe it or not, I actually usually I don't feature the dungeon module version of these lands, but because I knew you had the t-shirt is why I featured this exact one. I wanted to point that out.
Yep, yep.
So, my
Love it.
last question for you. So, obviously, I know you've been following the channel for a little while here. So we have the two mountains here. So, I just featured the cool goblin jumpstart basic land. I guess my question is, what mountains do you play in your actual goblin list? Because we always talk about the spicy basic land of the day. So, what is your spicy basic land you play in the list?
I love the Jumpstart Goblin Mountain. Obviously, I'm very familiar with it. I think I much more prefer like the full art look. So I'm sad that they don't have a full art version of it. But once they print that, I'll definitely play those. So actually, I play pretty much in all my decks. I play red, and I play the Dominaria United Stained Glass Mountain. I just really like the all the bright orange, fiery colors. It just looks really cool to me. I don't know. I like the Goblin Mountain, but maybe I'll change my mind someday. When I play Rakdos Sacrifice, I like the full art like Phyrexian. They're like in Phyrexian, the basic lands. But yeah, I really like the vibrant colors of the stained glass ones. So that's
And
what I
and
do.
it's kind of fitting because a lot of the main goblins that are in your deck are on the Dominaria plane. So I guess it is also kind of a flavor, thing too.
Yeah, believe it or not, I don't think I've ever thought about that. But yeah, Chain Whirler, Horde Master. I mean, goblins are kind of just from Dominaria. So yeah, there you go, flavor win.
Right, exactly. So, okay, so that's the entire main board. Let's go and hop into the sideboard. So, for those who are longtime viewers of the channel, normally we just kind of give like a general guide as to what you should kind of be sideboarding. But today, we're talking about exactly what the sideboard is. So, Landon, the floor is yours. Go ahead and talk about all the sideboard cards that you featured in your deck, as well as, what matchups you typically like to bring those in.
Yeah, so I love the sideboards for Rakdos decks a lot. I just love how strong and powerful and impactful they are. So let's talk about actually the Leyline of the Voids first. So you play 4 Leyline of the Void. You'll never see me with less than 4 of a Leyline in my sideboard. You always want to max out. If you're playing Leylines, you want to be drawing them in your opening hands. So we're playing 4 Leyline of the Void. This is almost exclusively for the Is It Phoenix matchup. You always bring this in, but you do want to be careful when you're making your mulligan decisions because you don't want to ever mulligan good aggressive hands against Phoenix. Even if you really want Leyline of the Void, you never want to mulligan hands that are still just strong. So we are playing for them though, just because that really makes that matchup, which is a matchup you will face a lot, at least right now in the meta. We really want to make that matchup easy in games 2 and 3. So for Leyline of the Void, those can also be discarded with Fable, or if you end up keeping in your Fisher Wizards in that matchup, you can kind of loot them away, which is nice. Another plus for Fisher Wizard. But you'll usually want to side out a couple Chain Whirlers in the Phoenix matchup, and I'll sometimes also uh, board out some pingers for some fatal pushes because they'll bring in Ledger Shredders, and Crackling Drakes. So that's Leyline of the Void. We're also running 3 Fatal Push, which is just a really, really good removal spell in black. So you'll be wanting those in the Amalia matchup for sure. You'll want them, a couple of them against Phoenix in the sideboard games. There are a lot of matchups where Fatal Push is really good. It's usually pretty intuitive if they're playing important creatures that you can't traditionally deal with, or that you really specifically need to deal with in at instant speed. I like siding in those fatal pushes. We're running 4 Thoughtseize, which I think is one of the best cards in Pioneer, if not the best card in Pioneer. You want those against your combo decks like Lotus Combo or Quintorius Combo. You want those against some of your control decks like Blue Eye Control or Niv-to-Light or something like that, where they're just kind of going to start dirtling around if you take away their best card. So you can kind of close in with the kill, a fast kill against those decks. So I really like 4 Thoughtseize, just max them out. If you want to see it, you want to see it. So I do like running, close to the max amount of each card in my sideboard because I just think it's, if you want to see it, you want to see it if you're going to bring it in. So 4 Thoughtseize. Then we've got 3 Reckless Bushwhacker, which is a little bit of spice that I love. You bring those in against your control decks, or any deck. Like you'll bring them in against combo decks as well, Lotus combo. So those are for matchups where you just want to be as fast as possible. You just want to be swinging with goblins. So you'll be pretty much turn 1 1-drop, turn 2 2-drop, turn 3 1-drop Bushwhacker, swing, and then turn 4 hopefully Battlecry Goblin, and it's easy game over. So I really like Reckless Bushwhacker for those matchups. This is a card that not a lot of people have tested, but I really like it. So I'd recommend playing some number of those. Then the last card that I think could definitely be changed to something else depending on your personal style. I play 1 Goblin Ringleader because the card is such an awesome top deck when you're in kind of like a game of attrition against, a more controlling deck. Just top decking Goblin Ringleader feels so good. You can just slam it, refill your hand, get in for some hasty damage. It's just a really good card in matchups like Mono Black Waste Knot. You'll always bring it in there. You'll bring it in against something like Red Black Midrange, some of your other mid-range decks where you're not necessarily trying to be the fastest. You're kind of just wanting to have that value. But that's a card that I could definitely see switching out for maybe another, a Fatal Push or something else if you really just don't think that Waste Knot is going to be a problem. So, yeah, those are my sideboard choices. Do we want to go any deeper than that with like specific matchups, or are we good with that?
I think you nailed it. Honestly, that was pretty good.
Awesome.
So, okay. So, one of the last things we talk about, so we'll have a little bit of like a wrap up after this, but I know for all of our recent deck techs, we always talk about like different budget alternatives. So, to be able to cut costs on this deck, so it's only $347 US to build the entire deck as it's currently constructed, which is extremely cheap for a Pioneer deck just in general, especially one that's, capable of winning a regional championship qualifier. The budget list that I threw together was only 102, which mostly was just from cutting like the Blood Crypts and such. Really the only card that's really pricey is Fable of the Mirror Breaker, but I guess some of the cards that are a little bit pricey, kind of like Fable, like Snoop is only about $5 US, which really isn't that bad. I guess, if you're looking to play a more budget-friendly list, like what are some cards, like in the sideboard or the main board that you could cut, that would still have a solid replacement and still be effective?
Yeah, you can absolutely cut Cavern of Souls from the mana base. You can absolutely do that. It's really only in there for like the blue-white control matchup. Really, that's one of the only decks that's going to try countering your creatures. So you can absolutely cut those and shave off, almost $100 off the cost. Blood Crypts are really solid, but you could find some budget alternatives for those. Fable, I mean, if you're gonna spring for a card and you're really into Pioneer, I mean, Fables are a good investment anyway. But I could definitely, I mean, there are benefits to removing Fables. You can get more synergy out of your Horde Masters and your Conspicuous Snoops. So I could see running, some lower to the ground creatures over Fables, and you'd probably still get a lot of good results out of the deck.
So with Fable, I believe in the budget list, I'm pretty sure that I replaced Fables with Hobgoblin Bandit Lord. I guess, is that like a solid replacement, or what would you recommend replacing for Fables if you're playing on a budget?
Hobgoblin Bandit Lord is really cool. I like the synergy with Call the Death Dweller because you can give it Death Touch and kind of just like kill something every turn, which is kind of cool. But I'd advise against playing too many of those because you really just want to be faster. You could go down on the 3 drops if you wanted to. So I would probably just add more Fireblade Chargers. Off the top of my head, I think I would just load up on some more 1-drops. Maybe play that one of Touch of Moonglove or something. That's probably what I do.
Okay, all right, perfect. So this is pretty much the end here, except we have the wrap up. So essentially, Landon, the floor is yours. Is there whatever you want to talk about. If you want to give like a quick tournament recap, some cool plays you had, maybe what you would potentially change with the list, if you're going to another competitive event, which are you going to be playing Goblins in Washington, D.C.? I guess the floor is yours. Take it away.
Yeah, a couple weeks back, I played Goblins, brought Goblins to my second attempt at an RCQ down in Lower Michigan, and I ended up going 5-0-2 on the day. I think I went 10-1 in games, which was really crazy. I ran into some really good matchups. I ran into Mono Black, Is It Phoenix a couple times, and some other mid-range and control decks, which are really, that's the best matchups for this deck, just because of the way you can apply pressure and grind out. So I ended up playing against Is It Phoenix in the semifinals, which was pretty much the finals because it was a two-slotter. And that was the only match where I dropped a game. And it really came down to the wire at the end. And I ended up being able to go just wide enough to get in lethal. Let's see, there's a couple crazy moments that were caught on camera because the event was streamed with commentary for a lot of those matches. So there were a couple just crazy top deck moments that I had where, everything looks hopeless until you top deck the Call of the Death Dweller and then blow up your opponent's 5 flyers or whatever it is, and the game's just kind of over. So it's just such a blast to play. I will say that. As far as changes I would make, I'm really happy with the list. I don't think I'll be changing anything anytime soon. The only thing that I might consider changing would be that one of, you know, uh, 1 mana black Death Touch instant card, whether it be Touch of Moonglove or Toxin Analysis, which we don't have on here, but you can look that up if you're interested in it. Toxin Analysis just gives your creature Death Touch and Lifelink, and you get to investigate. So there's some play there where you can kind of instant speed give your Chain Whirler Death Touch with its trigger on the stack. Just kind of get a little tricky if you really want to. But it's really just kind of like a one of fun of that I might try. But other than that, I'm really happy with the list, and I'll probably be playing it in Washington. I can't see myself playing anything else as a goblin at heart. All my decks, my favorite decks are goblin decks. So I think it could be really good. At least how I see the meta right now. We got a lot of good matchups, a lot of decent number of creature decks out there. So I can definitely see myself bringing it to Washington D.C.
No, definitely sweet, and I must say I feel like I'm speaking for most of the frequent viewers of the channel here. As someone who posts a lot of different creature type matters decks, I think we are all extremely happy to see not only a creature type deck that it doesn't see a ton of Pioneer play not only do well but be good enough to take down a regional championship qualifier. I think we are just all so happy to see that, because obviously, you got your vampires and you've got, like even like merfolk to a certain extent. But, goblins I feel like has been, kind of a little underrepresented recently. So I think we're all really happy to see that you were able to take it down. I think I think it's fantastic. And I know definitely when you were giving updates and such like that for the tournament, and I was watching the finals while I was eating dinner that night, and it was so exciting to see that, because not only, like, is it a sweet deck, but you're also a great player, and I think, like, you play on the channel here all the time, and you're just a great player, great person, and we're just so happy that you qualified with I would assume, like, one of your favorite decks you've ever played.
Yeah, thank you, dude. It means a lot. Yeah, I love Goblins. This is my first time ever finally qualifying for the RC. I've got a ton of top 8s with Goblin decks, but it really paid off, and so just super happy with how it turned out. And you'll always see me playing Goblins. I think it's one of the decks where the more you play it, the better you get. There's just so many intricacies that you learn as you play the deck. So I think that's part of why it went so well for me. So if you love decks like that, with a really high ceiling, try out Goblins, man. Do it.
Okay, all right. Well, I guess, is there anything else you wanted to include before we do the wrap up here?
I think that was it. If you have any questions, I can answer them in the comments too. If you have any specific questions, I can do that. So that's all I'll say for that.
Perfect. Okay. What we'll probably do is there'll probably be a comment pinned by Landon there. So if you have any questions, you can just wrap it right into that feed so that way he can get notified if anybody has any questions regarding goblins. And if you're watching this video in the future, if there happens to be a new goblin card that was spoiled that potentially could see play in a deck like this, yeah, feel free to leave any comments in that thread below, and I'm sure that Landon probably would be happy to respond to those. So, okay, well, that takes us to the end of the video here. Thanks so much for Landon for joining me in this video. This was super fun to do. Very excited that Landon qualified for the regional championship in Washington, D.C. And thank you so much for watching this video. The deck lists are in the description below if you'd like to check it out. We have Landon's RCQ winning list as well as the budget alternative list if you'd like to check that one out for yourself. Huge shout out to our channel members, Ralph, Matt, Arcadius, Ray, Gary, and Sarwanoki. If you are interested in being a channel member, it's only $1 a month. You get access to the exclusive Discord as well as other features here on the channel. So I'm Commander Crane, and I'm joined with Landon here in this video. Thanks so much for watching. We hope to catch you in the next video.